How's it going, guys? Rotozap here, and today we're going to be talking about something kind of interesting. I haven't posted a video in a really long time, but this right here, this article gets me pretty excited, so I figure we talk about it, and being that I am someone that kind of has a good understanding for math, I felt like I could probably explain a lot of the more technical details of this article for anyone that's kind of confused, and yeah, just kind of, this is a long article, so this video is hopefully going to be an easy to digest TLDR. But keep in mind, I am going to be talking about math, so if you don't like math or math confuses you, I will try to put it in the most simple terms possible. But yeah, this is a pretty math intensive thing for KI to put out. So basically, the first section here, we're talking about why. Why do they feel like they need to rebalance the stats? And basically, it's because they bring up a very interesting point, which is that our stats are reaching a limit in terms of like practicality. So power pips are reaching 100%, right? Ever since Darkmoor, really even sometimes at Legendary too, but really since Darkmoor, it's been pretty easy to get 100% pip chance if you really wanted to like dedicate yourself to doing that, and you wouldn't have to give up that many stats. Same with accuracy, you can get pretty much perfect accuracy for every school so that you're not base fizzing. And yeah, everything is just kind of reaching a certain point, and it's coming to the point where KI can either keep adding more stats, like more new types of stats, or they can maybe make up for stats that schools aren't so good at by giving them higher stats and things they're not normally good in. So, for example, they use the ice example, right? So they can't realistically increase ice's resist. That would be crazy. So what they've been doing is giving them more damage, but that's kind of a problem because ice wasn't really meant to have damage. That was supposed to be the trade-off to begin with. So it creates this kind of weird situation where they don't really know what to do. So they think redesigning how things get calculated from the ground up might help make it a little more viable. Because of course the other option too is like just not making higher stat gear, but then the players have literally no incentive to get it, right? If they're not seeing some sort of power increase, why would they be using the gear? It just doesn't really make sense. So this is where things get scary, right? This is where we see the word limit function. So we hate limit function. All the homies hate limit functions, let me tell you. But it's not as scary as it seems. So they're saying that most of the stat calculations after this are going to be in the form of f of x is equal to x divided by the quantity of x plus a, where x in this case is the stat in question, a could be a constant or perhaps another stat. So what this actually means is everyone knows that anything divided by itself is 1. Quick math, right? That's not too hard to understand. But a in this case, when you divide something by itself plus a number, it starts to kind of degrade, it gets lower. And it's going to be a number between 0 and 1, and that's where the term limit function comes into play, because in theory, if a were infinity, right, if I were to say that a is infinity, no matter what number you put in for x, f of x would always be 0, right? And that's kind of a weird if you've never taken calculus before, it might be kind of a weird concept to think about, but technically, if you took any number, right, and divided it by infinity and took the limit of that, you would always get 0, because in theory, the number on the bottom would be so ridiculously high that it would only make sense to round to 0, because there wouldn't be enough significant figures to even, make it worth it. Like, it just doesn't make sense. So basically, f of x is going to be a number between 0 and 1, and that's where things get kind of interesting, because it will change the dynamic of how certain stats get calculated. And when I see this equation, the very first thing I think of is a different way to calculate resistance, right? A different way to do the resistance check, because currently the resistance check is nothing. There is no real resistance check. It's the damage gets applied to the spell, the incoming spell gets put on the player, and then whatever your resist is, that is how much percent of the attack is negated. So in the current form, right, if you have 60% resist, that means that 60% of your incoming attacks will be like negated. So in other words, the attack will only do 40% of what it was supposed to do. And this will change things, right? Because, you know, I'm going to whip out the calculator real quick. All right, so weird, very weird jump cut. I was doing math wrong, so I realized I was doing it wrong midway through and decided to just re-record. So basically, I want to do an example of this so that you guys really understand what this means. So if we were talking about this in terms of damage and resistance, we'll say that damage is going to be X in this case, and resistance is going to be A. So if our character had 100 damage and our opponent had 50% resistance, right? That would equate to 100 divided by 150, because, you know, 100 plus 50. Which, if you put that in a calculator, you get 66.6%, or what you really get is 0.66 repeating, but we'll equate that to 66.6%. So in theory, that would mean that you're actually only blocking like 33% of the attack, which that doesn't really make sense. I would doubt it'd be that harsh of a difference. But yeah, in theory, that would be 33%, right? And then let's say you had 60%, that bumps you to 62.5%, which actually means 37.5% is being, you know, negated instead of 50, which was only 33%. But this doesn't quite seem right, and we can actually, again, you can add A and also add another constant. So if we were to say X plus A plus B, where B in that case is a constant, A is resistance, you can get it closer to the regular numbers that we would be expecting. Like, for example, if we were doing a constant of 50, so X plus A plus B, constant of 50, you know, in that case, the grand total for our 50 resistance example would come out to 100 divided by 200, which would be 50, which is exactly what we were expecting. Which honestly kind of makes sense to me, because if we were to do 60%, right, we'll do 60 plus 50 plus 100, which is 210, and then 100 divided by 210. Sorry, I'm using a calculator here. So 47. So it would only be blocking, you know, that's a really not user-friendly number, but it's roughly 53%, we'll say, right? So basically what this means is that, you know, having really, really high resist is like, it's okay, but it's going to kind of depreciate over time. Like, you'll get less utilization out of your resist as time goes on, which I think makes sense. And on the same token too, your damage will become less effective the higher it goes. So it kind of works out. I think it kind of cancels each other out. We'll have to see it put into practice. They are really going to have to get this math right. That is like the most important part of this. But I think it's cool. I think it's a different way of doing the calculation. I think it's more advanced. I think it makes sense. I'm a fan. Okay, now let's talk about crit and block. This is where things get very spicy, okay? Because crit and block are also getting a total overall. Okay, because currently they reveal that the way that it's calculated in its current form today is the way that we kind of expected, right? One player rolls the dice theoretically and sees if they get a crit, and then the other player rolls to see if they successfully block. There's not much math that goes into that. It's just one player has a whatever percent chance of critting, the other one has a whatever percent chance of blocking. Simple. But they're proposing a different way of doing this, right? So they're saying that the new way of doing it results at a base level 75% chance to crit and a 25% chance to block, which actually means there is a chance that your crit can just fail, right? And that's what they say. That's exactly what they say. Is that, well, let me find it. They say something about a crit fail is like a new thing. Oh yeah, here we go. Crit fail. So there's a 25% chance to just straight up critical and it just doesn't work, you know? Even without a block, technically, it still blocks. And they go into a little more detail here about how this works. I think that talking about this calculation is, honestly, it's even kind of confusing me. It's pretty strange, but yeah, it's basically saying that there is now going to be a chance that your critical can fail and it is totally outside of block, right? It is just a base chance that your critical can fail. It doesn't have anything to do with block necessarily. It's just there is now an inherent chance. And they're also saying that that chance kind of compounds with percentages. So in this particular case, 75-25, right, that would be in the most optimal way where, you know, you have a 100% chance to crit, your opponent has no block. In theory, there is still a 25% chance of them blocking. That's what they're kind of saying here, if I'm interpreting this correctly. But this is where things get really, really interesting. They're saying that now, even if the defender doesn't block, their block stat still protects them from critical damage. So that means that there's going to be it's going to be two different types of damage now in the game. There's going to be critical damage and regular damage. And the block stat is now going to help or aid in, you know, blocking critical damage. So even if you don't successfully block, it still doesn't feel like a wasted stat because you're not taking as much critical damage. So they give a little useful high-level comparisons, right? So if the attacker has 2 times crit stat versus defender block stat, it's 80% crit or 86% crit, 14% block, and the multiplier is 1.4. That's pretty hefty. However, let's say the defender has a 2 times block stat versus the defender crit. This means that they have a 40% chance to block, so much higher. But even if they don't end up blocking it, they still have the multiplier for the critical hit is severely decreased, right? It goes from 1.4% to 1.14, and that's a very big difference, right? Whipping out the calculator again, let's just say someone crits an FFA on you that normally would have done 2,000 damage. That's kind of unrealistic. It'd probably be doing more. But in the 1.4 example, that FFA is now doing 2,800 damage, whereas in the other example, it's only doing 2,280. So you're saving literally hundreds of health by having this block stat, which it can almost be looked at as resist in a way. So that's very interesting, right? The fact that they want to make block relevant, even if you're not necessarily blocking, I think is a very, very smart move. And then finally, lastly here, the only thing that they're talking about is that they feel like they still do want there to be a separation between PvE and PvP, which I think makes sense. And it also says in the conclusion here that, you know, this isn't really addressing accuracy, pip chance, and pip conservation, or pip conversion rather. But, you know, I think that that's fine, honestly. I don't really want to change the way that pip chance, accuracy, and pip conversion work. I think that those are fine as is. I think that the only things that really need changing are things that one person impacts the other kind of thing. So that would be damage, resist, critical, block, pierce. All these things I think, you know, should maybe be looked at. Now what would be really interesting is if we threw pierce and resistance into this little equation here, let me highlight it, this little equation here, right? That would be very interesting, right? Because that's going to change how pierce works too, because that means there's going to be effectively pierce decay, right? Because your pierce is going to be less effective as you get more of it. So that could be interesting, and it would definitely change how strike works. It might warrant talking about if we could rework strike, because that would make it a lot less overpowered inherently. So I'm hoping that these are going to be in the test realm. That's what it sounds like, but it's not necessarily guaranteed. I really want to see them implement this new system in the test realm though, so that players are able to kind of push it to its limits and figure out where, you know, things need to be changed. Do we like where the constants are at for these damage calculations and things? That's what we really want to find out, right? So I'm excited to see what they're going to unveil. I'm very happy that they're being transparent again with us. And yeah, I don't know when you guys can expect another video from me. This was kind of just off the cuff, so to speak. But yeah, catch you guys in the next one. Road is out. Peace.